Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending our workshop about selecting schools to apply to. My name is Krista, and we're joined today by Erin as well as Dr. Sanford. Erin, would you like to give a few welcome remarks?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see a couple of you here today, a couple of familiar faces. I wanted to thank all of you who have begun your applicant portfolios. We've started our applicant coaching sessions with several of the students who have submitted their portfolios already. And we found these to be great times to talk through your application, to prepare you for the application season ahead, and just to make sure your strengths are shining through throughout the process. And so we just encourage you to always be reaching out to our office with anything we can help you with, and we look forward to engaging with all of you in the next few months.
Thank you. I'm going to kick us off with just some basic housekeeping things that I want us to be all aware of. This session is being recorded, by the way, and it will be put on our website afterwards. This is also a shameless plug because it was my dog's birthday yesterday, so we had a little celebration. Okay, so we're going to spend the bulk of this presentation talking about factors for consideration when you go to craft your school list, some of the most important things to keep in mind, and then we will share a couple examples of the different application service explorers, essentially the databases of the different schools and any kind of applicant matriculation data you can really imagine. And finally, we are joined today by two applicants in our 2021 cycle who have very kindly volunteered to share some of their perspectives and their thought process when it comes to when they were crafting their list of schools around this time last year. You can also find our contact info at the bottom of the screen here. So before anything else, please note this is one of our workshops in our annual application cycle-oriented lineup of events. So our next workshop is going to be on Friday, March 19th about personal statements. We are doing this in collaboration with the Center for Career Development, as well as I'm pleased to announce we will have an admissions rep from UConn Med as well as Unicom on hand to provide their perspectives as well. So please mark your calendars. In addition, this is hot off the press. You are the first ones seeing this, but our next Chat with Alumni event will take place next Thursday, the 18th. We're joined by two fantastic alums. I'm seriously bouncing in my chair right now because I'm so excited they're joining us. Sahil and Eve, who are both going to speak a little bit about their journeys pursuing what their many passions of theirs, as well as finding their purpose. So please join us for that. Lastly, just wanted to make sure you're all aware of some staffing updates we've had in our office this past year. You can check out more about individual profiles in our 2022 cycle applicant orientation on that recording on our website. All right, and with that, Dr. Sanford, please take it away, beginning with some factors to consider.
Well, I just wanted to give my welcome to each of you joining us. As Krista's highlighted, our sort of seminar focus for those getting ready to apply, involve sort of looking and having you think about what to say in your personal statement, what to expect in terms of secondary applications and other application components like, interest inventories and, things like, judgment situations that you get that are used by admissions to get some feel for how you would handle situations, as well as selecting schools. There's really no immediacy today to be sort of honing your list down as of the end of the day. You don't really need to have that done until you get into sort of May or June. But, it's good to be thinking about it early so you have some time to explore, different schools and different options. And, some of the tools available for you to access, are quite helpful. In addition, there's no replacement for digging a little deeper into different websites and to, identify some other individuals perhaps at the schools. We have listings of where our students are and can sort of put you in touch with them so you can get a little more direct communication with people presently in each of those environments. to get some, direct answers to some of the questions that you have. So there's just a variety of sources that you can tap to really do a good sort of full search. So I'm going to walk through just a few slides that I typically go through when a student asks me about schools, because it can be initially a pretty daunting process. You may have all these schools out there. How do you differentiate them? How do you know, whether you have much of a shot at this school versus another school? And even if it is it a good fit for you as a school? So these first sort of general slides get you to think about basically who you are, what the schools are, and try to get you to think in the context of this: is this a place that really, that I'm a potential candidate for? And beyond that, is it really a good fit for me? So first thing I typically say is know thyself. You want to, just ask yourself some gut questions. What are my career goals? What are my skill sets? The group of experiences I have, preferences that I have. When you think about your experiences to date in terms of people who've been the most influential on you, experiences that have made the most contribution to you and who you have become, are things that you need to do serious reflection on, as that may well prepare you for particular schools. An opposite sort of opinion about this is, does it really matter where you go to school? As long as you're able to get in, as long as you're able to, move on through the curriculum and, get the degree and move on to residency and beyond for training, does it really matter where you go to medical school? And the answer to that, varies as well with sort of each school's consideration. If the end goal is you want to become a physician, there are various paths to do that in terms of USMD schools, in terms of USDO schools, in terms of other international medical schools, other Caribbean medical schools, other pathways. As you may remember, I had some experience doing admissions at medical school at the University of Connecticut for a number of years, and we were able to offer some unique and special programs. And one year, well, for several years, we had something called the Fifth Pathway program, which actually, took students who were graduates that went to Mexico, graduated from Guadalajara, spent a service year. Then they had to do an extra year called the Fifth Pathway to then actually become eligible to be applicants for the residency program application. So we had, sometimes there's these unique pathways, that exist. So, as you move ahead thinking about application, we're, want to do the best we can do to help support your candidacy as you move ahead to apply, to whatever programs that you're interested. General rule of thumb is to give U.S. schools, at least, 2 or 3 applications if you're, experiencing some, difficulty getting in on a first application. But to sort of think of it as a little, is not sort of, hopefully it's a one shot, one application deal. If it isn't, understand that there are things you can do to address, make improvements, and move forward. And, part of the office's goals and missions are to provide support, for students as they move through this entire process, even if it means, a reapplication or consideration of applications to other types of health professions. In any event, first thing is just to take a good, strong, reflective stance in terms of knowing thyself, what your keen interests are in experiences and aspirations moving forward. So we'll move ahead to the next slide. The key things that this boils down to typically is, in terms of types of schools you're interested in. So, there's in-state, out-of-state for sure. So bottom line, you do want to apply to your state school or state schools if you're from a state that has multiple state medical schools. This notion of private public, in most public school scenarios, schools are often required or and maybe have some legislative requirement. They take X percentage of their class from state residents. In most states, this is around 90%. Some states are 95%. Just as a local example, Connecticut's roughly been about 80%, for a good part of their history. So that means, in the state of Connecticut, you're probably one of about 600, maybe 650 state applicants applying, for medical school who have their residence in the state of Connecticut. And, you have one state school that takes roughly about 110 students, of which about, I would say 90 end up being Connecticut residents. So you have, 600, 650 applicants applying for basically about 90 positions as a Connecticut resident. In bigger states, of course, have more schools, and a lot of the numbers work out pretty close in the Northeast. One thing I've seen candidates do over the years is try to figure out what the best state is to be from an applicant perspective, and then become a resident of that state to give yourself the best possible chances. So, the chances of sort of making a decision by choosing a different state to be from, marginal, chances, not much really significant change there as you look at sort of state to state. So, type of school is what you want to look at: public, private, metro versus suburban. You've been in an environment at Storrs where, it's originated for sure as an agricultural college, and it's sort of in the northeast part of the state. They've done a masterful job of building up the local community, so that Storrs is certainly more as a community than it has been in previous years. But you might want to think about, do I really want to be in a major metropolitan area versus a more kind of suburban or even rural kind of school setting? If there's a preference and strong preference you have for that, may well play into the kinds of schools that you're looking for. East Coast, West Coast, there's a good, strong regional preference to where people want to go. A lot of Northeast folks want to stay in the Northeast. Some do want to, be able to go to the beach, be able to be in a warmer climate, be able to be in the heart of some other community, mid-country. So sometimes the location plays a pretty important role in a student's choice. And another is, in what kind of setting is the school actually located? Is it a major a college and university complex where you have access to a lot of different programs and different schools, versus a sort of isolated health center campus, that really doesn't have any close sort of physical ties to other units and disciplines within the university? It can also be something important to a decision in terms of what you're looking for as a location and a geography. So move on. Another one would be overall school missions. We're going to show you some examples of the MSAR and other sort of tools in a moment. But these work through, various things that typically students are concerned about as they look at choices of schools along, 100 different dimensions. So mission statement sort of stands out at the top, and most people will tell you to look at this first. So does the statement match your interests with respect to any of these different categories: research, clinical practice, teaching, leadership, technological progress, global health initiatives, service to underserved communities? So when you read these statements, you have a couple of different reactions. One is that the statement is so vague, you don't even know what they're offering at the schools. And it's so general, you don't come away with any sense that there's anything special that they're actually doing. Others are really very targeted and have very direct kind of key words and phrases that give you a really good sense of what their mission is. So I think you want to read through the mission statements of schools you feel you have an interest in, and it will be at least a little bit of a clue that will allow you to look into some other things. Some schools, have a very strong interest in innovation and technological progress, and are very sort of closely tied with biomedical engineering initiatives. So there are certain, students where that may be a primary interest that they have. So, you can just from reading the mission statement know that this is a school that is really kind of catering to what your goals and interests are, and that you may well have more of a closer fit to that particular school. There are other schools that are interested in recruiting physicians to serve in underserved areas where they're located. So if indeed that's a very strong interest you have, it would be a good reason to look into and consider applying to a school that has that particular emphasis. You'll get a lot of statements of the sort of language that they're interested in preparing the next generation of future health providers, researchers, and you come away feeling, well, there's really nothing that really stands out as anything particularly unique. There are other schools that emphasize things like innovation and individual scholarship and teaching as part of what they have as their main mission. So the mission statement is really pretty key, and it's one of the first things I advise students to take a look at. Sue? So other things we get asked all the time, does it really matter where you go? And, do I really have to be at a name, high reputation school or not? So how important is a school's reputation, prestige, and history to you is the question you need to ask yourself. And part of this sort of ties in with what your interests and goals are. If you're want to, become the head of a medical school someday, if you want to become, a real scholar and leader in a particular area or discipline, you want to be head of the department in some area one day at, a major healthcare institution, it may well be that the choice of school does matter a little bit to you in terms of reputation and prestige. Because in the end, you're going to be competing with the best of the best in the country for, such places, and your whole history will matter at that point. So ask yourself, what's the school known for, and is that part of really what you want to get out of this next phase of your application? So a lot of schools do have a very rich and extensive research history, sometimes in specific areas. So, if that is where your preparation has been placed, you may well have, a bit of a leg up in terms of the kind of student who they feel they can bring in and really contribute to the progress at that particular school in the designated areas for which they're really well known. And, finally, how does the school promote or position itself? Again, this sort of goes back to mission statement a bit, and they see their main responsibility as maybe preparing health providers for their community or for or students that really have a special interest in giving back to under-resourced or underserved communities. So how a school sort of positions itself, you'll find others that really speak about, we're interested in, developing the leaders for the next two generations of health providers and educators. So just again, reading these mission statements can often give you a very good sense of where you might be best to fit, have a best place. So next one. So factors for consideration, again, special program goals. There, as you start to look into various schools, you see that some offer special program tracks, whether you're talking about Stanford or whether you're talking about Tufts. When you apply, sometimes you have to identify what special track you're actually applying for. Some might be a scholarship track, others might be a rural medicine track, others might be, some combination fast track toward primary care where you can do medical school in 3 years and residency in 3 years and be done with the whole deal in 6 years rather than 8 years. Some may have a very focused research initiative. For example, at the medical school at Connecticut, and we used to have a research requirement there for the medical degree. And after a period of years, they decided to disband that particular requirement for degree. If you look at Yale, Yale does have a research requirement, related to completion of the medical degree. As I mentioned before, there are some schools that are very innovation technology oriented and are looking sort of for that next generation of new devices that are going to be invented, that you're going to be able to apply at the bedside as a clinician or in the research lab. Rural underserved, you're going to find some schools that offer specific tracks related to this. As Tufts has one of these with the state of Maine, for example. Some will, be very interested in presenting themselves for, students who are really thinking about a career that might involve, more management and administration related to health education, related to hospital administration, related to just overall community health, global health initiatives. These sorts of things you'll find with some emphasis at different schools. Some will put a great value on teaching. Just over the years, seeing the University of Connecticut evolve over time, there's a lot more opportunities for students to become involved in teaching while they're at the schools. I remember, it's like 15 years ago, we put forth the idea of having a student get involved in teaching history and physical exam as part of the small group stuff that's done as second year. So Dr. Henry and I had a student who, we did this as a pilot, and by the next year it was so popular, virtually everybody in the classes coming up wanted to do the same thing. And that student that we had actually eventually came back to Connecticut, is on faculty there now, and actually was, your chief resident, was head of the department at a time. So that interest in teaching and looking to incorporate some teaching into your medical school timeframe is something of special interest. And community-based education, again, is another thing that Connecticut and many other schools are very strong in types of offerings that they have. So the extent to which you're tied to the community, many schools have a community service requirement as part of what you need to get the degree for medicine. Other schools don't have a community service requirement, and there are just so many different options available to students typically. I mean, that may be something you want to look at in a little bit more detail. Many of you have gotten involved in community-based experiences in one way or another, and really hope to maybe continue that during your medical school years, something like migrant farm workers or some other community-based program of interest to you. There are certain schools where you'll be able to sort of walk in and continue your investment in those kinds of activities you've enjoyed as an undergraduate. So these are some special program goals and initiatives that individual schools have that may represent a good fit for you. So competitiveness, a lot of students basically start with, how many applicants do apply to this place and how many get in. And, we'll go through a bunch of data. There's just an example of a first year, class there. Is that Connecticut that we're looking at? It looks about right.
Yes, it is. And Dr. Sanford, the next two slides, I have the national MD numbers as well as the chart that you like to show.
Perfect. So yeah, that's where most applicants kind of start, and you can just make some judgments based upon the data you see for people that apply, the number that get interviewed. And, the first thing that strikes you about the Connecticut figures you see there, it's actually a pretty low number of people that get interviewed there. you look at schools about the same size, and often you see they interview about 700 or 800 people as opposed to, like 300, as you see listed here. Holistic admissions, we get asked this question every day. What is it? Do schools actually practice it or not? And, the sort of verdict is out. I think we have to take schools at their word that they do it. Having been involved in that for many years, I can say it happens. It doesn't have any sort of regularity to it to the extent that I think everybody you hope it will have, but it does happen. And it sort of flows from the group of people that you get to, be a part of an admissions committee at a school and the sensitivities they bring to it, and their individual judgments about applicants as they, go through and review files. So, there is no standard, basic overview of just how holistic admissions works at any given school, and does it work in every single instance the same way. There's no way to sort of get this information. But, we just confirmed that holistic admissions is present. It is practiced, and you do see opportunities provided to quite a variety of candidates that you might think, well, maybe, they're not as strong in terms of just meeting the numeric metrics, but they really do have quite extraordinary special strengths in other areas. So academic metrics, again, listed there by MD, DO, and dental, I think I'll get covered in some of the material coming next. Experiential components and core competencies. If you've attended some of the other presentations that Chris has put together here over the years, you'll see these very well laid out, and are certainly things that the schools pay a good deal of attention to. Experiential components, just to give you a couple of hints, schools will expect a certain amount of clinical experience. So that's, ballpark, basically about 100 hours or more that most schools are looking at. They're looking at community service components in as a general rule, maybe 300 or so hours in terms of service commitments. Every school does this a little differently. They have their own matrix they fill out for each applicant where they tally up hours, they tally up commitments related to different things, and then factor that in as they're evaluating candidates. And the core competencies, as they look through applications, they're looking for confirmation of evidence of these competencies through the things that you've been involved with, through what other people say about you, and just have you taken advantages of the opportunities available to you, are all things certainly they're considered.
Just a quick note that the links on this slide, which you'll be able to access after, they were recently shared in our newsletter as well, but they will take you to any kind of data or metric you could ever want to know about the 3 different application services representing MD, DO, and dental programs.
Okay, so this slide is overall people applying through MCAS and what those total numbers look like. So you can just sort of read through the basic high numbers, the number accepted, number of people eventually enroll, what the grades and MCATs look like for those applicants and those that are actually end up enrolling, how people self-identify, and the other things that you just see listed there in terms of MCAT averages and who's enrolled, that sort of thing. So bottom line is it's competitive, and you need to be strong in a whole bunch of different areas, including the metrics that you basically see here as a summary slide for the MD schools. And this gets into a little bit more detail, tracking just combinations of GPAs and MCATs and what the sort of success level is for applicants in each of the grade categories listed at the left in the MCAT categories. So by each category, you see the basic numbers of applicants and the number and percentage accepted based upon those sort of GPAs. So as you might guess, those at the highest GPA range have, sort of higher averages of acceptance, as you see. What is very telling about this slide is that 2 points I usually make. One, if you were expecting to see 100% accepted in the highest GPA categories with that certain MCAT range, you're not going to find it. And that is a real truth of holistic admissions, in that, you're just not a shoo-in because you have a high GPA and a high MCAT. Indeed, the schools are making sure and looking to see that you have all those other experiences and credentials they want to see. And perhaps more importantly, as you go down, as a diagonal to the left from the top right, you're going to see people in lower MCAT ranges and lower GPA ranges where there is also at least a decent rate of acceptance. So, you can do your own sort of figuring of where your own particular application places you in this matrix. But, please appreciate that schools are taking students from a lot of these different cells that you see here as you look at this particular slide, and that there are many successful people, even as you sort of go down in the rankings here of GPA and MCAT. So academic concerns, when you first start out, a lot of students end up with 50 schools. They end up with how many ever schools seem to be in your target area where you're interested in, where you're meeting the academic credentials. And you begin to look at things in a little bit a different way. So focusing on different teaching techniques that have an emphasis in given schools. If there's a new curriculum or not, if it's a tested curriculum, typical weekly schedule, what that looks like. I can tell you years ago at the medical school, it was all of a traditional teaching method. Students were in lecture basically 30 plus hours a week, and the Department of Anatomy demanded that students be at the school on Saturdays. So anatomy lab was Saturday morning, 8 to 12 every week, in addition to other times during the week. And during the week, you were in lecture 8 to 12, 1 to 5, at least a couple of days a week, and then you had electives in the afternoon. So things are different now. There's a more of a hybrid teaching methodology at most schools. Many have moved to more team-based and expect a lot more, independent work before you even arrive at the classroom. Schools differ a lot in terms of the number and variety of electives that they have. The faculty advising and mentorship is really key. And one of the things you find is many schools have a very deliberate linkage of students with particular faculty mentors early on in their training, and you stay with them on a longitudinal basis. Clinical site training is another thing you want to look at. You ask a number of physicians, what was the most important part of their training? They will often end up reflecting on where they spent their initial clinical clerkship time in their junior and senior year of medical school, and actually where they do their residency. Another thing to look at is specialty hospitals. If you feel like you're really inclined toward one specialty in particular, that may be a little bit of a clue in terms of looking at special hospital facilities where you're going to receive your clinical training. And you often get status of residency programs. How a school does with their match process. Most schools do very well. Some schools do a little better than others, and sometimes it's year to year. Sometimes there's a surge upward in particular years. Other times there's some downturn. But it's this kind of data that I think you want to try to look at in terms of what's the academic program, what distinguishes it from other schools, and really does it match what my own particular interests might be. So just some key points. Does the school mission match your goals? Does the school teaching mission match your preferred learning style? Access some of the key sites for the data. These are individual school websites, the application service explorers. So if we have it at accessible I see, we're already into about 40 minutes here, so I don't want to take up too much time because I want the students to talk. But some key things, the medical school admissions requirement book, so and access on the computer. So if you just go in there and look through, I mean, they're going to give you all this data for each and every school, and you can begin to make some distinctions about whether this school is a good match to you or not. There will be, this also exists for DO schools. There's also a similar one for dental schools. So this is a really very useful tool, where you can go through, make some notes, keep your notes, and it really helps you in the end sort of, trim the list a little bit, based upon, things that are of interest to you. So Krista just called up the Yukon one, and you see we can just breeze through this briefly of all the different programs offered, who's in charge, who does what, who you contact for what, some basic admissions. There's a mission statement right there. You can see for each of these listings, it goes down through all the other sort of detail. And a lot of these charts are very telling, in terms of what they value at the school. So they do this for research, they do this for clinical experience, they do this for service. They then have these little charts where they give you the 10th, the 25th, the 75th, the 90th percentile of where you stand in terms of your numerics, GPA, and MCAT, and then for each of the individual areas. So we often get questions, gee, if I have this MCAT of sort of 126, do I have a shot at any at this particular school? Accessing some information like this can at least give you a little bit of a clue about whether or not you should go ahead with an application to those schools. Then it just gives some matriculation data by a whole bunch of different categories, a number by year. It gives male, female, it gives ages, it gives self-description, it gives, states represented, ends up talking about where your residency placements are at the individual school for the most recent entries, goes into, just a whole lot of detail that I won't go, through each one and every one, but you can glean a lot of information from this, and it will help you to identify, a couple of things that really sort of ring true for you. So similarly, AACOMAS does the same thing. Won't really go through that because I'm really running short of time here, but really the same kind of mission statement, basic stats for the school, things that really distinguish the schools are really all the same for most of these service entries, and just gives you a lot of data to help you sort of sort through. And it talks about other things there related to prerequisites, related to things that they're looking for. There's a selection factor section that, as clearly as they can express it, they stress those sorts of things. They give things related to finances, how much, what's the average debt coming out of the school at the moment, what's the cost per year. Some of these things will be quite striking to you as you look through and look at this information for a number of schools. And similarly with dental schools, that's also presented in that way. So choose use those resources that you see listed on that slide to be able to access some of those things. I think what I'd like to do now is just ask the students that we've asked to come and talk about, what they did as they walked through this process for the year. So again, these slides are just a number of different things. If we can come back to this, I just wanted to make sure we got the students to speak up, before we run out of time. So Lily and Kyle, can we ask you to chime in here?
Yeah. So my process sort of was similar to what Dr. Sanford described in the beginning, sort of using the MSAR as kind of a way to get a big list. I think I ended up with like 45 schools. And my sort of additional factor I wanted to consider was my significant other was also applying the same cycle, and I would have definitely wanted to end up, if possible, in the same city or school as her. So that kind of prompted me to consider big cities with multiple schools, places where we both had sort of experiences in the past proximate to the schools, things like that. So that additionally kind of focused me on the East Coast where those clusters of schools tend to be. But from there, I kind of narrowed down by looking at the setting, looking at the mission of schools. I definitely sort of encountered that thing Dr. Sanford said, where a lot of the schools had missions that were very general, but other ones were really informative. And I was able to find some schools that sort of resonated with my background, which is a little more on the service side, especially EMS and research too, but more emphasis on the service. And then the other thing that stuck out to me was the grading basis for the schools. It seemed to me a lot of schools, or most schools I looked at with like 2 or 3 exceptions, were pass fail. And that seemed like something I really wanted, especially in the first 2 years, to kind of it seemed like it created a more pleasant culture. So that was another thing I used to kind of narrow the list a little bit. And then the last thing was the pedagogy. And that one was more just an awareness. I didn't really trim schools based on whether they were more traditional lectures or more, say, team-based, but it was something I kind of at least was interested in. And from there, that kind of trimmed me down to, I think, high 20s in terms of schools, which is still definitely on the higher end, but between sort of wanting to maximize the chances of having some overlap with my significant other, and also the fact that my MCAT was a little bit higher than the corresponding GPA would necessarily be, which made it kind of tricky to figure out exactly where I was competitive in the MSAR because they didn't match up super, super well. So that was the other reason I kind of applied pretty broadly.
Great. I can briefly introduce myself. My name is Lily Zong. I'm a senior here at UConn. I'm a PMB major and an English minor. And I'm very excited to be attending UConn Medical School this fall. And so in terms of my kind of thoughts and process when planning for this next phase in training, I kind of focused on these 3 main ideas, which Dr. Sanford talked about through the presentation of the curriculum, kind of the extracurricular opportunities, so what's going on outside of what I'm learning, and then the location and people. And so in terms of curriculum, this is more specific to UConn Med, but their team-based learning style with that flipped classroom was exactly what I was kind of looking for. I know I learned best this way. I've had some experience of that back in high school as well as in college. So I knew that was kind of the type of curriculum I was looking for, as well as kind of this early and sustained exposure to clinical practice. Right now, I'm kind of looking into primary care for the future. That may change and that's perfectly fine. But as of now, kind of that early exposure to clinical practice was a priority for me, as well as still within the realm of curriculum, really engaged faculty. And this was something I had exposure to through meeting faculty, different events, different Q&A sessions. And I think I found somewhere online that the UConn faculty to student ratio is about 2.6 to 1. So you can tell there's really like a lot of commitment to the students by the faculty. And then the next kind of category of things I was looking at was what would I be doing outside of the classroom? And one thing I've dedicated a lot of my time to in my undergrad, and I hope to continue in medical school, is community service, like Kyle was saying as well. And UConn is very dedicated to community service, their community-based education, all these different opportunities through migrant farm workers, the UST AHEC scholars, and other opportunities that really kind of struck my interest. And that's just one of my core values, so I wanted it to be high on my list of priorities. And then the last kind of category was location and people. Did I want to be close to home? Yes. What kind of people did I see myself fitting with? The people I was meeting, both applicants or current students I was able to talk to, it just really seemed like a place I could see myself for the next 4 years. And I know this is more specific to me and why I think that UConn Med would be the perfect fit for me, but this idea of kind of narrowing down what you think your core values are, and then seeing how the schools may measure up to those values, in addition to kind of the quantitative aspects of your application, that Kyle was also talking about through the MSAR. It can be very, very helpful for figuring out where you kind of might fall and what ranges you might want to be looking into. And another quick note is that this deep reflection of what you're looking for in your school can be very helpful as well for secondary applications. I'm pretty sure a lot of secondary applications ask why this school, and they're kind of looking for those specifics. So if you've already thought about those ideas before you had kind of applied initially, it can be very helpful for writing your secondaries. So yeah, I hope that helps.
Yeah, so just continuing, I think both Lily and Kyle touched on sort of key categories of things most students want to sort of put in the mix, to consider. At this time in the process, what I usually advise students to do is take a shot at a personal statement. It's one of the things that most people put off because you hate to sit down and write about yourself. I'm the same way, and I would probably put it off to the last minute myself. But it is very helpful to you as you begin this sort of thought process of what things matter to me, and what is a kind of best fit for me, and meets core values as expressed. And you have some time, to do this. Very often, when you ask people for letters of recommendation, they're going to ask you for a draft of your personal statement. So a good idea to at least try to get something down on paper. Indeed, you have time to reflect on that. There's another session in a month or so, or later this month, related to helping with personal statement writing. Both have also mentioned the secondary applications, and this is a mechanism used by schools. One, to get you to pay their fee. So there's usually a school fee. I'm old enough to know, schools used to not have a fee. You used to just apply, with your application, and that was it. You didn't have any kind of secondary fee that you had to pay other than you paid your application fee to apply. But a lot of schools, the funding actually to support the admissions office basically comes out of the fees they collect, for folks applying to school, and that's been part of how the offices get funded these days. More importantly, it does provide them an opportunity to see what your thoughts and reflections are about why them, rather than all these other school options that you may have. So, don't pass that off lightly. It's a way to distinguish yourself, as the application itself. You need to sort of think about this, and how can I really distinguish myself among this group of 60,000 other people, that are applying to medical school, and these schools in particular. To pay close and careful attention to those elements as you move along. In interviewing, every year there's instances where folks have difficulty interviewing for one reason or another. So it's a good idea to just think through this, do a little practice session with folks, try to do some mock interview sessions. There are different things we offer. There are different things you can access on the internet. You can talk to students at the schools where you're interested to get some additional information. But so those other sessions are important to follow through on. I think Krista had a listing of basic data in schools for students at the university. So these are additional resources that are available to you. So what I'll often tell a student to do, if you're really thinking about applying to a particular school, we can check to see if indeed we have students that we've placed at these schools. And if interested, perhaps, we can get permission from those students to have you touch base with them. So you see in this slide, walking through those that were accepted to MD programs, those that matriculated in these programs, and all the different schools that basically our students were accepted. And you can see there's a pretty extensive list there. And we have this for the most recent years. Same thing with DO schools. Yeah, I would just note that in particular in the last, I don't know, 5, 6 years, I would say we've had certainly a lot more interest at the school for students interested in osteopathic medicine. And that really does show up with increased acceptances over a recent years. So here again, you have all those schools listed where you see quite a number of your colleagues from the university have had opportunities at these places, and as well with dental schools. You know, every year we've got 30, 40 folks that are moving on to dental schools. A lot, of course, are triggering. UConn is it's a really tough dental school to get admitted to. Probably one of the top 3 in the country. In part because it's so closely connected to the medical school and the teaching at the medical school. But you can see quite an extensive list of good and excellent placements there in terms of dental schools across the country. So these are the kinds of resources that we have in the office that are valuable to you as you move on, to sort of making your list and trimming your list in. And it boils down to a number of those different categories and just effective and organized use of the resources. So what indeed starts off as a hugely daunting process, with often quite a number of schools in the initial cut, eventually through some close and concerted effort, you can bring that down. Nationally, the average is about 16 or 17 historically. If you're talking MD schools, on the DO side, it's generally on the order of about 6 or 7, 6 to 8. Just again, some concerted attention and effort, there can help you to, construct your list in a, reasonable fashion. So I think we're probably close to the end. I just wanted to leave some time. If folks had a few questions, we can maybe address those, or just ask Lily or Kyle if they had additional other comments. Krista, Carolyn, Aaron, anyone else also want to chime in? Just wanted to leave some time.
I will put a quick plug in once more for our personal statements workshop. It's next Friday, March 19th from 1 to 2 p.m. in the same WebEx room. It will be recorded again. And we're doing that in collaboration with the CCD, as well as we will have an admissions rep from both UConn Med as well as Unicom in Maine on hand.
One of the great joys we have, just as advisors and teachers, is to really get to know our students very well at the school, and it's just such a pleasure, to be able to interact with such talented people. So just a shout out to everybody, who's on the call today for what they bring and what their promise is as health providers. What's really exciting for us is occasionally we get emails, from students that we've known over years. And, just about an hour ago, I got an email from a student that we've been counseling for at least 4 years, who's had repeated opportunities needing to apply, and he just got in today. So he wanted to express that. And I think it's kind of just a fitting note, to end this conference with this. Part of it is an endurance, episode, here that sometimes you have to go through, to continue to make, and give added strengths to your candidacy. So we're just here to help you as best we can, each of you, to sort of figure out where you stand, what represents a sort of good listing of places for you to give yourself every opportunity. And it's what we wake up thinking about. It's what we find joy from in giving you some, coaching and counseling. And we're just thrilled to, see completed, stories. So, Lily a short time ago was in Dublin, and now she's going to be in medical school. Kyle's been doing clinical stuff here, there. He was a participant in our post-bac program a short time ago, did his undergraduate at Cornell, and he's now, going to be choosing a place to go, in medical school in just a month or two. So it's just a great pleasure to deal with so many talented and purposeful people.
All right. Well, I suppose at that we have beautiful time today. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in, and have a wonderful week.
Thanks, everybody.